anti-Semitism in the mainly Gentile, Judeo-Christian Western world?
I'm not convinced there is a significant rise in anti-Semitism here, and I say this as someone whose earliest political memories are standing behind a platform on which my father was speaking. He was the anti-fascist organizer for the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen after the war, when Moses fascists were rife again on the streets of London, and Moses' armoured car was going by, the stones were flying, and people were chanting, the Yids, you've got to get rid of the Yids. So I know a bit about anti-Semitism, and I fought it in my youth, and I would go on fighting it now. But I don't think that there is a real significant rise in anti-Semitism certainly in Britain at the moment. What there is precisely in accord with the sentence that you actually quoted, and that is that anti-Israel feeling, particularly in the context of the conflict with Palestine, the Islamophobia in which we're living at the moment, is generating a conflict between Arab and Muslim, particularly Muslim students and young people in Britain, and Jewish students, for example, in the universities. This breaks out, and it's interpreted as anti-Semitism. I don't think it is at all in that old and classical sense of the term. But I also think it's absolutely true that Israel is, in this sense, a factor in any rise in anti-Semitism. We are constantly told by the Israelis and by the Zionist lobby in attacking Israel and in criticizing Israel's breach of human rights, its occupation, its etc., its apartheid policies, that in doing so we are encouraging anti-Semitism. The point is that it's those very acts of Israel which encourage anti-Semitism, and drawing attention to the acts is not encouraging anti-Semitism as such.
But is it not a fact that prior to the obscenity of the Holocaust, most Jews, perhaps I should say most really informed, thoughtful Jews, were opposed to Zionism, but for many reasons. But one of them was they feared that if Zionism was allowed by the big powers to have its way, it would at some point provoke anti-Semitism.
I don't know about that. I mean, you're quite right. My understanding of history is that there was a sort of a minority Zionist movement back in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. In many cases, it didn't actually matter where the Jewish state was going to be established. It could have been established in parts of the remote east of Russia. It could have been established, I think, in Mauritius or Madagascar or somewhere else.
Parts of Africa.
Parts of Africa. It wasn't, I mean, I think that if you read Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of Israel's autobiography, then he's passionately clear that it is Eretz Yisrael, it's the land of Israel, which ought to be the homeland for the Jews. He sees it very clearly as a colonizing mission. And his biography describes how he fought against leading Jews in Britain who were deeply opposed to this idea, who regarded it as maverick, hostile, sort of absurd, and so on. And so I think that was indeed the majority view at that point, and quite rightly too, I would say.
Stephen, given that we might disagree about the extent to which it is so, but I think you are saying, yes, Israel's behaviour is certainly a factor in new anti-Semitism or old anti-Semitism coming back.
Whilst the Zionist lobby says that any attack on Israel is an attack on the Jews, then by definition any criticism of Israel becomes an anti-Semitic act, and that's the way that it's played out.
But does it not follow? You see, it depends what you think anti-Semitism is. I'm not talking about daubing anti-Zionist slogans on graves and things like that. I think the tip of the iceberg is actually what middle-class people say, for example, at dinner parties. I think it's unspoken at the moment publicly, but I certainly detect, and I know other people do, these effing Jews. The more we see of Israel, clearly the obstacle to peace in the Middle East, more and more people are beginning to say, these effing Jews. Now, that's what I mean. I think it's there in the psyche. But it seems to me that the Jews of Western Europe and North America, they now have a vested interest to protect themselves in making common cause with those who are calling upon Israel to be sensible about peace on the basis of justice for the Palestinians? Do Jews not have a vested interest?
I'll keep asking me, what do Jews do, and so on. I don't know. I was brought up as an Orthodox Jew. My Judaism is I'm an atheist, I'm a biologist, I'm a scientist. I'm not really interested in Jews as a Jewish group, except insofar as when anti-Semitism is there or when the fascists are there, I will fight it. What I am concerned with primarily is justice for the Palestinians. And so my emphasis is on finding ways of putting pressure on Israel to accept United Nations legislation, to accept the International Court of Human Justice, to accept human rights, and to actually sort of recognize that there will be no peace in the Middle East without peace with justice, and that means peace with justice for the Palestinians.
But do you see any reason to believe that hardest-core Zionism in Israel will ever be open to persuasion that there must be justice for the Palestinians?
I think it's very difficult to see that. It's very difficult to be optimistic about the situation of the Palestinians, whilst particularly Israel is a client state of the United States, where it receives endless subsidies from the United States, where the Europeans are apparently so obsessed with the need to have decent relations with Israel's science and technology that they're prepared to write roughshod over the EU's own legislation on human rights. The fact is that only last week, as we're speaking now, the EU has agreed to involve itself in discussions with Israel about getting full associate status rights for Israel in terms of trade, in terms of culture, in terms of science and technology. And when the issue of whether it was appropriate for Israel to be part of the European science and technology community, when this was being negotiated over the last couple of years, whilst Israel was in breach of human rights legislation, the response from the European Commission was clear, and that is economic success and research collaboration supersedes and trumps human rights legislation. Now that was an unequivocal statement which could have come out of the mouth, if you like, of any of the apologists for Nazi Germany.
What frightens me, Stephen, is that I think you can define Zionism as something like this. If a gut Zionist was telling you what he really represented, he'd say, Jews can't trust Gentiles. If you needed any proof of that, the Holocaust was it. Okay, we had to create a state by ethnic cleansing. It doesn't matter. That was the way it had to be. We had to create the state to be a refuge for Jews from everywhere. We actually don't care what the world thinks. I mean, is that being too melodramatic about what Zionism actually is?
Oh, I think it's probably a fairly legitimate, tough statement about what hardcore Zionists would say if you like, sort of their hair was down and they had a couple of drinks.
Yeah. You weren't all that happy, I got the impression, about talking too much generally about Jews. But there is a very, very important question to ask about Jews. And it comes from a quote from the great Jewish American critique of Israel, Alfred Lilienthal, whom you will know of. Now, he said that I'll give the exact quote. He said that talking about the Holocaust, the trauma sparked vicariously by the Nazi genocide caused Jews to be totally blinded, and that they readily forsook